Hi, my name is Lena from Provident Credit Union. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, where we will be discussing the 1-2-3 approach to paying for college. This webinar is being recorded. All participants have been muted, so please use the Q&A box for any questions. All attendees will receive a follow-up email with today's recording and presentation deck within a week. Your presenter today is Jeff Lackey. He is the Director of Relationship Management at Sallie Mae. And with that, I'd like to now hand it off to Jeff. Welcome, Jeff.
Oh, thank you, Lena. I appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Glad that you had time to carve out a little bit of time today to meet with this presentation. Obviously, there's a lot going on in especially in the federal world of financial aid. So we hope that this will, like I said, kind of explain what would go on in a normal situation or a normal year or so. And then, as we hear various different changes or so within the federal funding landscape from the federal aid standpoints, we'll obviously have to pivot at those times. So the information I guess I'm delivering today is a snapshot as to how everything is today, with the caveat that there might be some changes, possibly. Might be some changes on the horizon, but overall, there's not a whole lot thinking that it's going to affect the upcoming academic year 25-26. So with that, all the information today is being delivered with the information and the knowledge that we have as of today. So let's go ahead and move forward. Oops, I apologize. I have got a very sensitive mouse that keeps advancing screens. So I'd like to go ahead and get started with just kind of this little statement. There's a lot of stuff that's going on, like we said in the news, whether it has to do with federal funding, whether it has to do with college affordability, whether it has to do with should I be looking at college, should I be looking at apprenticeships, should I be looking at a trade, whatnot. I'm not here to make any sort of judgment as to what somebody ought to go and pursue. That's obviously based on what they feel they want to do and what their career is. What we do want to know, or what we do want to reference, is that with some of the studies that Sallie Mae does, we thought that this kind of stood out a bit. One of the studies we do is called How America Pays for College. And within this study, we noticed that 88% of undergraduate students believe that college education is still an investment in their child's future. So we're seeing that families, not only just the student, but the families are seeing college as an investment. And like I said, that is in spite of some of the headlines that we're seeing as far as declining enrollment, some of the other aspects that we're seeing, and whatnot. FAFSA participation is up, and we'll talk about the FAFSA here in a couple of minutes. But we're seeing some very positive things about college in general. And again, if college doesn't happen to be what you're thinking about doing, but you still want to explore a trade, maybe some of the information that we talk about today might even help you with the financing of your and the funding of your trade program. So what today we are going to do is we're going to learn about the FAFSA. We're going to learn about free aid options. We're going to do a deeper dive as to what college is about. We'll obviously take a look at the free aid options, the scholarships and the grants. We're going to talk a little bit about what a financial aid offer is, because obviously that's one of the best ways to try and figure out what all of the information is that you're going to be receiving about your funding package from a financial aid office. And then, of course, we will talk about some of the self-help options, excuse me, find out about some of the self-help options called student loans, and even a little bit about work study. And then if after you've received free aid and you've received your student loans and such, and what we consider the self-help, if there's anything that you still additionally need, that's what we call the gap, or gap financing. You might hear it referred to as unmet need. There are even options and such like that that you can utilize to kind of help you move forward and be able to fully fund your education. So let's now talk about the sources of funding that families relied on to cover the cost of their education. And as always, we see here in this chart, families have relied on a variety of funding sources. And on the left here, you can see that there are 6 funding sources that families can use, starting with the light blue. Obviously, that's going to be the free money, the scholarships and the grants. And we'll talk a little bit more about what scholarships and grants are in an upcoming slide. Then you will see that there's family resources in the dark blue. This is also going to include the parents' income and the savings from parents, as well as the student's income and savings. And then, of course, the parent borrowing and the student borrowing. And then finally, funds from relatives and friends. You can even throw in, one-time graduation gifts sometimes can even be included in and stuff like that. In academic year 23-24, though, families' out-of-pocket contributions covered about half of college spending, roughly about 48%, while scholarships and grants covered 20%, 27% on average. And notably, the proportion of college spending covered by parent income and savings has decreased over the past few years. In academic year 23-24, this funding source covered 37% of reported spending, and that's down from a high of 45% 3 years ago. Borrowed funds covered 23% of college costs, with the remaining 2% being covered by relatives and friends. Over the last couple of years or so, families used similar strategies to pay for college, so these percentages really haven't changed significantly. So let's go ahead and shift into talking a little bit about what some of those awards or financial aid offer topics are going to be, and we'll start with scholarships and grants. So before we start talking about the specific types of awards, Sallie Mae wants to recommend to students and families that they always start with the 1-2-3 approach, and thus the name of our title of our webinar today. Start with the 1-2-3 approach to paying for college. And this approach allows for you to maximize scholarships as well as federal and student aid options before considering other types of self-help like private student loans or Parent Plus loans, some of the things that essentially you would either have to pay back at a later time or borrow. We always want everybody to start with the money they don't have to pay back, so applying for scholarships. And we'll talk a little bit about what scholarships are. They're not just for straight A students and captains of football teams or captains of sports teams. After that, once you've started with the free aid options and scholarships and grants, we always encourage students and families to take a look at the FAFSA, which is called the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Make sure that you fill this out and submit the FAFSA to apply and put yourself in potential eligibility for federal and some state aid. You may qualify for several types of federal and state aid, including grants and work study, which you don't have to pay back. It'll also help you qualify for several types of federal student loans, including direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. And then basically, if you still have a gap, then that would be the orange quadrant number 3. That gap being after you've exhausted scholarships and grants, then you've moved to the federal aid, which can include federal student loans. If you still have a need for more money in order to fund your education, then that would be a great time to consider a responsible private student loan. Consider Parent Plus loans if you're a dependent family and parents want to borrow to help assist in paying for college. There's tuition payment plans as well. So there's a few options that you have to choose from if you still need additional funding after the free aid and the FAFSA aid. Let's talk a little bit about the grants. So we just mentioned them in the previous slide. Grants are going to be funds that don't require repayment, and they're typically awarded annually, and they're going to most likely be based on information that's provided on the FAFSA. And again, the FAFSA is the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. The grants that are offered, they can come from numerous sources, and they usually come from federal or state governments, but grants can also come from colleges and universities. And every once in a while, too, you can also get a grant from either an independent or a nonprofit organization as well to help fund your education. On this page, we've listed the federal Pell Grant and the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, which is sometimes referred to as FSEOG. That's its acronym. These are the major federal state these are the major federal grant programs. They are not coming from the state. Anything, when you receive your financial aid offer, and we'll talk about it on an upcoming slide, you should see the aid options should be spelled out with the word federal preceding anything that's coming from the federal government. So federal Pell Grant, federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, federal direct subsidized loans, stuff like that. That is a it's a high recommendation, if not a requirement, that that is listed for the programs. Now, in California, there is a very lucrative program called the Cal Grant Program. And this is going to be a California-specific financial aid program. And what it does is it provides grants to eligible students attending California colleges and universities. Like the Pell Grant and the FSEOG grant, they do not need to be repaid. Then they're designed to help students pay for tuition, fees, and potentially living expenses. If you want to learn more about the Cal Grant, more information on their features, their qualifications, and whatnot, California Student Aid Commission is who administers the grant, and their website is csac.ca.gov/calgrants, and that is csac.ca.gov/cal-grants. And I will make sure that I say that again, csac.ca.gov/cal, hyphen grants, grants. That's a great source to learn more about the Cal Grants if you or a student of yours is potentially or thinks they could potentially be eligible for these grants. So let's pivot a little bit to scholarships. Again, we're staying in the free aid column. Scholarships are financial aid awards, and even though you have to maybe go through a merit process or you have to win a scholarship as opposed to filing some paperwork and having the grant given to you or so, scholarships, even if you do have to win them and such, they are considered financial aid, but they're great financial aid awards as they're free and you do not have to pay them back. A scholarship might cover the entire cost of your tuition, or it might just be a one-time award of a few $100s. Either way, they're worth applying for because it'll help reduce the cost of your education. If you're wondering when you should apply for scholarships, each scholarship is going to have its own unique requirements that indicate who qualifies and how to apply. It also depends on the scholarship deadline dates. Some deadlines are as early as a year before college starts. So if you happen to be in high school now or so, you should be researching and applying for scholarships. You could even be doing it right now, but a good portion of them might be available over the summer months between your junior and senior years, as well as your senior year moving into college. You certainly don't want to stop looking for scholarships for any reason or so. And if you do think that you may have missed a window or so, don't give up. There's a ton of scholarship information out there. A lot of scholarships may potentially have multiple openings. They're not open just for one portion of the year. They may open and close, open and close, open and close 3 times in one year, for instance. So don't give up looking for scholarships. Look at scholarship information and see which ones you can still apply for now. And then, of course, you may be asking, well, how do I apply? Each scholarship is going to have its own requirements because, again, they're going to be coming from their own vendor, essentially, or their own foundation. And so, you may probably have to rely on the scholarship's website to give you an idea of who qualifies for the scholarship and how to apply. But when you do, when you go down through and you find a scholarship or so, make sure that you read the application carefully. Fill it out completely and make sure that you meet the application deadline dates. Most college families here that you can see on this slide, roughly 87% or so, agree that earning a scholarship is something to be proud of. And moreover, 80% of families who relied on scholarships to cover the cost of college agree that these scholarships made it possible for that student to go to college. And with that said, among 36% of families who did not use scholarships in academic year 23-24, only 30% applied. Lack of awareness of available scholarships and the eligibility requirements continue to kind of stand in the way of those thinking that they're not scholarship material. Half of the families who did not apply were not aware of available scholarships. And like I said, other reasons for not applying for scholarships, including believing that the student wouldn't win or thinking that applications required too much effort. That is, obviously something that each scholarship, you're going to have to look at each one of them individually and make that determination. But there are so many scholarships. There's millions of scholarships out there. Some of them do not require essays. Some of them, are just simply can be applied for in 5 to 10 minutes. And just like that, on the flip side, there's many scholarships that want a writing assignment, either a full-blown essay or at least a few sentences to answer the question on the application more appropriately and such. So the nice thing is that when you have millions of scholarships out there, you can choose and read up on the ones that you want to apply for based on what your feelings are. You're not required to fill out scholarships, but again, with millions of scholarships out there, and with some of the percentages that I quoted, there's a lot of scholarships that are not receiving a whole lot of applications or maybe not even any at all. So your chances are really good for a lot of scholarships out there because again, we're not seeing a large percentage of applications coming in for certain types of scholarships. So. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the scholarships that are available. Some people believe, like I said, that scholarships are only for athletes and scholars, and obviously in some cases that's true, but there are, again, so many scholarships out there. There's so many opportunities. In fact, you wouldn't believe the types of scholarships and the number that are available. We've found that there's almost, a scholarship for almost every skill, every interest and hobby. There's a scholarship out there for volunteers, there's poetry scholarships, there's filmmaker scholarships. The list just goes on. The challenge, however, though, is looking for the right scholarship. And it can take some time, but students really should realize how important this free money can be. Because the more free money that you can get for college, the less you have to borrow. And scholarships can be awarded for a variety of reasons, as you can kind of see on the list on this slide. So while a lot of federal and state governments can award some scholarships, the majority of scholarships are awarded by the institution, so the school, college, university, in which students enroll. And the other great source, very high source of scholarships are private organizations. So these are going to be places in your community. They're going to be regional companies, regional membership affiliations, national affiliations, and such. You can see all of the checkmarked bulleted points on this slide is a place that could potentially have a scholarship. And again, there are so many resources for scholarships. Students can turn to local communities. They can, like I said, go to federal and state agencies. Employers is a great source of scholarships. A lot of community scholarships sometimes have trouble advertising. Let's say that we're a small company. We want to create a scholarship program for our local community. We may put it on our website, but if people don't really have a need for our company, they might not be visiting our website. So where else can we go to publicize our scholarship? A lot of local community organizations or even businesses or so sometimes will turn to public areas within your town or your city in order to help publicize their scholarships. And so one of the great places to learn about scholarships is in your local library. And if you happen to be going to school outside of the community that you grew up in, check the library and the community that you grew up in, but also check the library of where the college or university is located. So you essentially have a couple of places that you can check for free scholarships there. One of the last bullet point at the bottom that's really growing in popularity is students and families utilizing what are called scholarship search engines. And these search engines are basically, just that. They're a big search engine that aggregates scholarship offerings. And what they do, either based on a profile or a filter service, allow for you to kind of go through and based on the answers that you put in your profile or put in your filter will allow for scholarships that hopefully better match who you are, or better match, the organizations you're affiliated with, or maybe the degree or program of study that you want to graduate in. And basically, what it'll do, hopefully, is put those, ahead of like a list of scholarships, and you may have a potential better time of matching, feel more confident in applying, and hopefully, because of the criteria that's in the scholarship and your personal attributes and the things that you're involved in, hopefully it'll give you a better chance to win. So, having said that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the process of how you would select a school and how you're going to determine cost. So we've talked about the free aid options, but you say to yourself, well, I don't even know how much money I'm going to even need. There's a lot of things that students and families should consider when selecting a school. And obviously, the most obvious one, and the reason why we're here today most likely, is going to be cost. And so first, what you want to try and do is avoid sticker shock. Schools are required to publish what is called a cost of attendance. And this cost of attendance involves line items that are directly billed to you, like your tuition, your fees. If you're living on campus, then your housing and your meals, and things that you'll have to pay for directly. But then you also have built within the cost of attendance line items that you are not billed directly for. Let's say like your books and maybe your transportation costs. Again, housing and meals if you happen to live off campus, as well as any type of personal expenses and such. It seems small and kind of pedantic, but you're still going to have to buy toothbrushes. You're still going to have to buy reams of paper, so on and so forth. So all of those personal expenses that are education related will also be included in on this cost of attendance. And so those charges that are directly billed to you by the college or university, those are obviously going to be called direct costs. And those that you incur, but the school doesn't really bill you for, maybe like your bus pass or parking for your car, obviously the gas, the fuel, the maintenance upkeep of you driving your car from where you live to where school is, all of that is going to be considered indirect costs. And it's going to be different for every student that's out there. So what you'll have to do is when you decide what school you're going to, what your living situation is going to be, you're going to have to determine which costs are direct and indirect, and then determine if there's ways to kind of cut some costs, like potentially commuting from home, if that's important, or if it's maybe even possible. You may find that you'd like to live on campus, but maybe the costs are just, too hard for you to do, and you may have to live at home for a year or two more. If it's a great way to cut down on costs, then that might be a question that you basically have to say potentially yes to. You'll also want to consider out-of-pocket costs. So this is basically going to be considered what we call the net price. And this is the actual price that you're going to pay, as opposed to that sticker price or that cost of attendance that I just got done talking about. This is a big reason why we encourage students and families not to get sticker shock by looking at the initial price or that cost of attendance that a school potentially could publish. A lot of schools will offer scholarships and grants to help reduce the sticker price to make them more competitive. And then the last thing regarding financial considerations is anticipated indebtedness compared to potential outcome. It's really a good idea to think about the degree that you want to pursue. Think about how much it's going to cost at the various colleges and universities that you're interested in. Think about how much you're going to have to take out in student loans. And then obviously think about the outcomes after you graduate. What is the graduation rate at that particular school in the program that you're interested in? What are job placement rates? You want to take a look at that and make sure that it's going to be a healthy career that you're going to find potential in the future. And then you've got to compare that with the cost of education at the school or schools that you're looking at attending. And if you're looking at a salary that's in one particular area, but yet the costs of the schools that you want to attend to are much higher, it might take good time to take a look and see if maybe there's a school that offers a similar degree that will still allow for you to get that same position, but maybe their tuition and maybe their overall costs will be a little bit lower and more manageable. Other things to consider are what are the admission requirements? Look at the school's median grade point average, look at their test scores for previous years, and you should be able to see if a school is, a good fit academically for you. Make sure, like I said before, that things like curriculum, the degrees that are available, the majors, make sure that they really line up with your aspirations. And again, look at what the retention and the graduation rates are. Retention meaning how many students, when they first start in school, actually make it to graduation versus deciding to leave. Either for a short period of time or altogether. This information is readily available on the United States Department of Education's College Navigator website, and typically it's linked off of the school's website as well. And if you can't find that information on the websites, just go ahead and ask the admissions representatives at the school or schools that you're interested in, and they'll be happy to give it to you. Um, one of the other things that you want to do, like I said, is look at the job placement rate. See how many students decide to move on to grad school from the school, and then take a look at the graduation or the placement rates for that. That should give you a good idea as to how successful graduates are actually are. So, few things to think about. Not a whole lot, but it can take some time to make sure that you get yourself a thorough analysis, and decide what school that you want to move forward with. So the bottom line to attend any college is not the cost of attendance. It's going to be that net price. Again, the cost of attendance is the sticker shock. The net price is what you're actually going to pay, or much, much, much closer to what you're actually going to pay. The net price, again, is the cost of attendance minus any free money from scholarships and grants. And this is the portion of the cost that students and families will need to make the decisions on the best way to pay based on your unique family circumstances. The net price is usually covered with a combination of resources from income and savings, work, if you've got a career, hourly wage, whatever, and you've earned money in work and you want a portion of that to go to your college costs, that can also be counted into the net price. And then obviously loans and a few other options can also take advantage or take a good portion of the net price that you would have to pay. So, you want to go ahead and look at that net price, focus in on it, look at what the scholarships and grants are that you're receiving. And then what you do is looking at that net price, decide how you're going to fund the remaining portion. And we'll talk about some of your funding options to fund that portion on a couple of slides moving forward here in a second. So before we talk about the actual physical awards, we talked about grants and scholarships because they're the free aid options right now. The grants, like we said, the Pell Grant, federal Pell Grant, the federal FSEOG, and then the Cal grants do rely on the FAFSA. And again, I've made mention to it a couple of slides prior, but we're going to do just a quick little dive into the FAFSA and how it's responsible for the eligibility, a good portion of the responsibility of eligibility requirements for the various different federal and state programs. So again, the FAFSA is also called the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's the first step in applying for federal, state, and even every case, some institutional aid too. Some schools might use portions of the information from the FAFSA to award their institutional grants or scholarships. It's perhaps the most important form that you're going to fill out to determine your financial aid eligibility. The Department of Ed has stated that they are committed to an October 1st launch date for every year moving forward now as to when the FAFSA is going to be eligible to apply for and submit to the federal processor. So again, mark that on your calendar if you happen to be college bound, that October 1st moving forward, unless we hear something different in the news, every October 1st moving forward should be the opening day for the FAFSA for the upcoming academic year. Before you fill out your FAFSA, because this is going to be a document that 99.8% of individuals are going to file online, in order to sign or verify the information that you put on the FAFSA is true and correct, you're going to have what is called an FSA ID or Federal Student Aid ID number that you're going to have to apply for first. It's a way to authenticate who you are, as well as parent or parents. It's a way for you to authenticate who you are. And you will use this in combination with filling out the FAFSA to sign and submit or to verify who you are if anything happens in the future on the FAFSA. When you fill out the FSA ID, this is an FSA ID that you will have for the rest of your life. So you want to make sure that you definitely fill it out, and keep the information in a very secure place. We talked about the October 1st deadline, and the reason why I highlighted that is that it's very important that you complete your FAFSA early, as some financial aid programs, both at the federal, state, and institutional level, some financial aid programs are awarded on a first come, first served basis. And this also goes for returning college students. So, returning students, you're going to have to file a FAFSA each and every year that you plan on going to school. So you do not get special consideration for certain types of aid just because you're a returning student. So if you happen to apply late, you could miss out on some funding options. For those students applying to college, keep in mind that financial aid deadlines are not the same as college admission deadlines, so make sure that you check them both. And lastly, don't assume you aren't eligible for aid because your family's income is too high, because almost every student is going to be eligible for some form of financial aid. Aid eligibility is based on several factors, not just income and savings, which some families feel that by putting that information on the FAFSA could potentially void them of winning anything off the FAFSA or being eligible for any type of aid because of the FAFSA and the potential high income. Excuse me. There are two things that the student and the parent need to do before they can start the FAFSA. Again, I mentioned you have to fill out the FSA ID first. If you don't already have an FSA ID, or if you do have one that's already established, you can still keep using that FSA ID moving forward. But if you don't have one yet, you need to establish it once, and it'll be the same throughout the entire process. Um, we always recommend, if you don't happen to have an FSA ID, we recommend that you apply for one 3 to 5 days before you decide you're going to fill out the FAFSA. And that information needs to be validated by the Social Security Administration. So it might take a couple of days for their back-end processes to validate and become active and show that you are who you are. Once that has happened, you filled out or you're in the process of filling out the FSA ID, there is going to be a need for what they call multi-factor authentication. And this is also referred to as two-step verification. And chances are you've come across this already. But basically, what's going to happen is when you establish a username and a password, your username obviously being your FSA ID and then a secure password that you've come up with, you're going to have a secure code sent to you, and this is the two-step verification or the multi-factor authentication, by which they will send you a secure code either via text, via email, or you can log into an authentication app and retrieve this number. So you're going to need your FSA ID, your password, and then the secure code in order to get into the website studentaid.gov, where the FAFSA is housed, and you would start the application process. The user is going to determine your preference on how you want to receive the code, that secure code, when you're setting up your FSA ID. So in addition, once the multi-factor authentication method is set up by the user, you will be presented with a backup code. And again, this backup code is pretty serious. The backup code is exactly that. It's a backup that allows the user to log in without multi-factor authentication if for some reason you don't have access to the code via text, email, or you can't get to your authentication app. Please know that there is only one time the user will be presented with the backup code. So when you do get that backup code, make sure that you print it out, write it down, put it in a secure place. And hopefully that secure place is not something that you forget about. So here we've listed other information and documents needed to complete the FAFSA. Some things are relatively commonplace, but you may notice federal income tax return and W-2s are not listed as needed information. And that's because Department of Education and the IRS have set up a direct data transfer of financial information, and it's called the Future Act Direct Data Exchange, or the FADDX. And this eliminates the need for tax information for the vast majority of FAFSA filers. That means no more tax forms, forms or W-2s. And because we don't, or the FAFSA does not request those anymore, it's greatly reduced the number of questions on the FAFSA, roughly from 104 questions down to about 36, 38 questions. One important thing to remember about the FADDX tool is that the user, which could be the student and the parent, will not see their financial information on the FAFSA. So that's really important. Parents, if you didn't want your student to see what your income was, or students, you don't want your parents to see what your income is, you won't be able to see it on the FAFSA after it's been submitted. Users must agree to use the FADDX tool via the authorization of the access and the transfer of data. And you need to commit to this near the start of the FAFSA for each user. So if both the student and the family, maybe the parent or so, do not authorize access to using the FADDX tool, they will be able to key in your tax information, but you're not going to get the important, what they call the student aid index number, which is what the FAFSA determines. You won't be able to get that calculated number, and that calculated number is what the financial aid offices are going to need to start the process of building you a financial aid offer. The transfer tax information is used to calculate the index number, like we said, or that student aid index number. Unlike students and parents, financial information is sent to the school in case they have to verify conflicting information or to calculate a professional judgment. You will want to keep this in mind if you know your financial situation has changed since the tax filing year. And lastly, students, you can submit your FAFSA information up to 20 schools at a time. So if you've got 20 schools or 25 schools you want the FAFSA information to go to, you fill out the FAFSA once, you put down 20 schools on the FAFSA that you want to have it sent to, you go ahead and submit it. Wait roughly about 3 to 5 days or so for the FAFSA processor to process it. You'll get a document back. And at that time, when you get that document back, if you have an additional 5 schools or so that you want to have the FAFSA sent out to, in addition to the 20 you already sent it to, you can resend them at that time. So we've referenced the student aid index number or the SAI number multiple times, and you might be wondering what the SAI number is. And that SAI number is basically the output of the FAFSA formula, and it's used to determine what types or essentially how much aid a student is eligible for. It's not going to be a reflection of what the student or the family can or will pay. The student aid index number can be a negative number. It can go as low as negative 1,500. And again, it's not a dollar figure. So keep in mind that negative number does not qualify students for necessarily extra financial aid or federal aid, and it does not increase the total amount of aid a student can receive. Rather, it is meant to allow schools to identify students who have increased need. And students can also qualify for federal Pell Grant multiple ways. One way is to use your SAI number and subtract it from the maximum Pell Grant amount to determine your Pell Grant amount that you could be receiving. And that chart sometimes can just be Googled and seen once Congress has submitted the information to Department of Ed, they will put out a Pell Grant chart. Or you could simply just have help or ask your admissions or financial aid representative to see if they could give an estimate on the Pell Grant that you would receive. So with that, sometimes you can also utilize the number of parents in the household size, your income percentage based relative to federal poverty tables. There are ways that you can kind of predict how much Pell Grant you will receive, but it is a little bit of a process or a work in progress to get that information. You may find it's just simply easier to wait for the financial aid offer to come from the financial aid office. Family size is going to be based on the number of people claimed as exemptions on the tax form filed. And even though this is a field that has been pulled directly from tax forms via the FADDX tool, FAFSA filers can still put in the family size on the FAFSA to ensure accuracy. So maybe let's say you have 3 in the family on your tax return, but now you've actually got 5 in the family when you go to fill out the FAFSA. You can put 5 in the family to ensure accuracy. So from that standpoint, financial aid might reach out to you and just make sure which number is correct. Parental information on the FAFSA is to be from the parent who provided the greater portion of the student's financial support, as opposed to the custodial parent. So, in-kind support, like housing, food, transportation, etc., that should still be taken into consideration when determining financial support. And lastly, the number in college is no longer factored into the federal formula. For those of you that filled out FAFSAs in the past years or so, that was a field. It's not there anymore. So the student aid index will not change no matter how many children are going to be in college. The question is still on the FAFSA. It's just no longer factored into the formula anymore. So you may be saying to yourself, well, okay, if I'm filling out this information on the FAFSA and I've got information to submit, I've submitted it, but the information that they asked me to pull from, so like my taxes, which potentially could have been from 2 years ago, or maybe when I filled out the FAFSA, I was employed, but I'm no longer employed anymore. Is there anything that I can do so that the financial aid office sees a more representative financial situation for me now than when it was when I filled out the FAFSA or when the FAFSA's documents that they requested, which sometimes can be income tax from up to 2 years ago, circumstances have changed. You can approach the college or colleges and universities that you're interested in attending, and seeing if they will entertain you filling out what is called a special circumstance letter. Special circumstance letter allow for you to highlight the significant loss or reduction in either income or your assets. If some, heaven forbid, somebody passes away in the family, the immediate family or so, it can be addressed in a special circumstance letter. Obviously, if you have anything that happened to your house, natural disasters or so, or if you have medical or dental expenses that were not covered by insurance or your premium, uh, all of that information can be included in on the special circumstance letter. And then the financial aid office will have a process, and it could differ between various schools, but the financial aid office should have a process on how they determine special circumstances through what is called professional judgment and see if there's a way that they can get your student aid index number more representative of your financial situation. So you may want to say to yourself, okay, I'm ready for the FAFSA. Where do I go? Studentaid.gov is where you start the FAFSA process. And when you click on Start the FAFSA process, it will ask you if you have an FSA ID number. If you do not, it will provide a helpful web link over to the FSA ID at that time. So just simply go out to studentaid.gov to start your process in filling out the FAFSA. So after the FAFSA is filled out and you've submitted it electronically, it'll go to the federal processor. Students are going to then receive what is called a FAFSA submission summary report. This will be within a few days of after you submitted it, and it'll come electronically to the email that you put on the FAFSA. Go ahead and look through all of it. It's going to give you the basic information about your financial aid eligibility, as well as it will recap all of the answers that you put on the FAFSA. So read through it, make sure that all the information was true and correct. Like I said, it'll give you a little bit of highlight or guidance about some federal awards that are available based on the FAFSA. And then it'll even let you know if there's additional information that may potentially be needed. Maybe you filled out a question incorrectly, or maybe you were selected for a process called verification, where financial aid offices are given a random list of individuals that filed the FAFSA that financial aid offices have to compare tax information with what was put on the FAFSA to make sure that there wasn't any data gremlins or anything like that that might have messed something up. Colleges are going to use that student aid index number that comes on your FAFSA submission summary to start the process of determining your eligibility for various different aid types and amounts. And they are going to build it and they're going to put it on a financial aid offer, which they will deliver to you at a later time. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how the process works. We talked about the cost of attendance. The cost of attendance, again, is that sticker price. It is the cost of attendance. Again, that's going to be the five factors: tuition and fees, housing and food, transportation costs, personal expenses, and transportation. Again, it could be an inflated number. relative to the actual net price that you will actually end up paying. But the financial aid process will take a look at that cost of attendance. They will then subtract your student aid index number that comes off of the FAFSA, and that is going to equal your financial need. The financial need is what the number or the figure that the financial aid office is going to start building a financial aid offer for you for, and they're going to try and meet as much of that financial need as possible with scholarship, any institutional or state scholarships, grants, loans, work study, anything that they have eligibility for to look at your eligibility for and award to you and put on your financial aid offer. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of those financial aid offers. So after being accepted to college and completing the FAFSA, students are now going to receive a notification that outlines how much the school will cost and what kind of financial aid they will receive, including federal, state, and various institutional or school sources. Schools have different names for these offers. It can be a financial aid offer, it can be a merit letter, award letter, or financial aid package. There's a lot of push to try and make it called a financial aid offer so that folks know that they're looking at a what could potentially be an apples to apples comparison. So hopefully out there you will see it called a financial aid offer. But many schools will send these offers electronically. Some of them might even send them via regular mail. Some of them may even send them electronically, but they'll put them for view access on a school's financial aid portal. Also, there is, unfortunately, right now, there's no standard format. There is a lot of guidance as to how schools should have them formatted, but there is no standard universal format. So some of these financial aid offers can look different from one school to the other. It can make comparing them to be a bit difficult. But the financial aid is typically going to be listed by term. So if you're going to a semester school, you can typically have two terms on a financial aid offer. If you're going to a quarter school, you could potentially have three or maybe even four terms on a financial aid offer. And so you're just going to have to kind of keep track of that as you're trying to put a true apples to apples comparison as to the amount of aid that you're receiving from one school to the other. It's very important that you compare the financial aid offers from all your schools and see which one has the best deal for you. To make it easy, sometimes you can use a worksheet and compare offers side by side. You can create your own spreadsheet or you can maybe find one online. It's very important that you do this to make sure that you ensure that you have a complete understanding of each aid type. Am I receiving the same amount of grant aid from one school to the other, or is one higher or the other? Am I receiving more scholarship money from one school to the other, or loans, for instance, for each school? So hopefully it'll give you a great way to compare school one to school two to school three to school four. So we've talked about your net, or we talked about your cost of attendance. We talked about the net price. We've talked about the free aid. Now we're going to dive into what is called the self-help. So basically, these are what are still going to be considered federal financial aid or state financial aid options, or even private aid options. But they're going to require you having to do something, either repay them back, or you may potentially have to work for them in order to receive the money. So let's talk a little bit about the federal student loan programs. These are highly popular for students that do need additional funding after the free aid. There's going to be two types of federal student loans. One is called the federal direct subsidized. One is called the federal direct unsubsidized student loans. In both cases, these are student loans provided by the government and they must be paid back with interest. Subsidized loans are for undergraduate students that can demonstrate financial need. So that whole cost of attendance minus the SAI number, that needs to be a positive number. That estimated need needs to be a positive number. And if you do have a positive number, then that puts you in eligibility for a direct subsidized loan. If you have your cost of attendance minus your student aid index number, it ends up being maybe, let's say, a low positive financial need or even maybe a negative financial need estimated financial need number. You may still find yourself eligible for loans and such, but they will be in the unsubsidized category. And unsubsidized loans can fall either for undergraduates or graduate students, depending upon what level of school you're attending. But you do not need to demonstrate financial need in order to be eligible. Again, on both loans, the borrower is responsible for paying the interest while in the in-school period or grace period or a post-school deferment. Some of you may be saying, what is a grace period? Well, on federal direct student loans and on some private loans out that are offered by private banks, credit unions, and financial institutions and such, a grace period is a period of time after you separate a school from a school to where you have a grace period essentially where you do not have to make payments during that period of time. The idea and the premise is to allow for you to get established. Maybe you have to move or so. Maybe you've got to interview and get your career started. It allows for a period of time for you to do all of that and then be ready to start on your payments on your loan, maybe let's say 6 to 7 months later. The U.S. Department of Education has annual and aggregate limits on how much you can borrow in these programs, and you can see it here on the slide as to how much you can borrow per year in these programs. Also, borrowers are charged an origination fee, and these fees are going to be subtracted from the loan prior to disbursement. However, the borrower will have to pay back the entire loan amount, including the origination fee. Schools receive the loan proceeds minus this origination fee, so the borrower does not get the full amount that they borrowed. Like we mentioned, borrowers are afforded 1 6-month grace period on these loans. Interest does accrue throughout the grace period, and it is capitalized at the end of the grace. Borrowers can pay the interest at any time up until the end of grace to avoid this interest capitalization situation, where essentially the interest earned on the loan gets paired with the principal, and then any interest that's accrued moving forward is accruing on both the principal and the interest amount that was added. So there are various different repayment periods on these loans, anywhere from 10 to 25 years. There are several deferment options, including in-school, economic hardship. There's even military deferment options depending upon your situation. So very favorable loan terms, all things considered, things that you typically will not find in the private sector. So, we've talked about the options afforded students via the FAFSA. So now that you've received your self-help scholarships and grants, you've gone through the FAFSA and received the additional FAFSA aid availability. Let's talk a little bit about how to fund any other remaining balances. So schools themselves will often offer tuition payment plans to help you cover any remaining balance. These plans will allow you to spread your payment over time, typically a semester or an academic year. These plans may have fees or interest charges that vary by school, so you want to make sure that you check with your school regarding their particular plans. For parents, keep in mind that you may have costs today while your student is home or in high school that you can allocate towards these college costs. Think of costs associated with sports or extracurricular activities that you can allocate towards college once your student starts attending. Tuition payment plans typically allow you to make monthly payments over a certain amount of months, and that's typically determined by the school, rather than have to make a lump sum payment right at the beginning of a term. There might be a fee, or typically there is a fee to participate in the program, which can vary by school. Some people say if you want to pay part of your balance with a payment plan and you want to cover the rest of it with a loan or a Federal Parent Plus loan or so, you can do that, but you're going to make sure you want to coordinate something like that with your school's financial aid office, as well as the student accounts or the bursar's office or business office. They will most likely want the loan to be approved and in place before the payment plan goes into effect so they can accurately calculate your payment. But it is possible to combine various different types of gap options. There's also a federal loan program called the Federal Parent Plus Loan Program designed for parents to help pay any remaining balance. These loans are taken out by the parent and they can cover the entire financing gap up to 100% of the school certified cost of attendance minus any other financial aid received. Parents can request deferment of payments while the student is in school, or they can start repayment on these loans immediately. Unlike the federal direct student loans, where students, automatically qualify for those loans. The Parent Plus loan does not. There is a credit history that is considered, and parents must complete an application in addition to the student completing the FAFSA. So again, with the federal direct student loans, they are slightly different than the federal Parent Plus loans. Parents must also meet additional requirements if they have adverse credit history. Some things to consider is that borrowers are obligated for the life of the loan and cannot be released from the loan, or this loan cannot be transferred to the student. This is a parent loan, so the parent, not the student, is obligated for the loan. Also, parents may have to borrow additional funds to help cover the loan fees. You can see that the loan fees are 4.228% on a federal direct Parent Plus loan, which is higher than on the federal direct subsidized and unsubsidized student loans. A responsible private student loan or a private parent loan is another source of gap financing. And these loans are going to be funded by banks and credit unions like Provident Credit Union, not the federal government. FAFSA is not required for these loans. They are outside of the FAFSA process and they are credit based, however. So just kind of think about that. The repayment period and terms are going to vary from lender to lender. So we can, encourage families to do their research to determine which lender and repayment terms best fit you and your situation. Private loans can cover up to 100% of the school certified cost of attendance minus any other financial aid received. And the nice thing is because most private loans have zero origination fees, you do not need to borrow extra money in order to cover these fees. Now, I mentioned they are credit based, so there may be potential for the need, or you may wish to have a cosigner on your loan, or it might be necessary for you to get approved. And you may be asking, what exactly is a cosigner? Is that my parent? Are they going to be responsible for the life of the loan, like the Parent Plus loan? Well, the answer to that is a cosigner is going to be any responsible third party. So it can be a parent, it can be a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, etc. The cosigner is someone who would help secure the loan and would only be responsible on that loan if the student fails to meet the repayment obligation. In many cases, in the private loan sector, lenders offer a cosigner release option after the student applicant meets various different requirements. So, in the private sector, the cosigner does not always need to be on the loan for the life of the repayment term. So, we've covered a lot of ground today, and as we kind of wrap up, we want to cover some tips and resources to help you along your way. Families should carefully review the information on their student aid report, make sure that there's no errors, make sure it's accurate. Students may have to accept or decline your financial aid offer with the school, so you're going to want to make sure that you do that. And again, it is different than the admission requirement or the application you have to do for admissions. Students, you do not have to accept everything on your financial aid offer if you don't want to. If you just want the free aid options, you can do that. If you need funding at a later time, always check in with the financial aid office, and they can sometimes, depending upon your situation, can get your loans back during or throughout the year. Financial aid offers are typically going to cover one academic year, and make sure that when you're looking at loans, compare all the terms, the conditions, the details on all of those loans, and not just necessarily the dollar amount. Provident has a great website. I'll pause here for 10 seconds or so. If you have a smartphone handy and you want to scan the QR code to the right, Provident has provided this website here for additional free financial aid information. It also has additional financial wellness information, including college planning, as well as just financial planning resources. So certainly scan that code if you have additional questions at a later time. And with that, Lena, I'd like to open it up for questions. I know we had a lot of information shared today.
Well, that concludes our webinar today. Thank you all for attending. As a reminder, we will be sending you a follow-up email with today's presentation. Have a great day, everyone.